episode 2 of the Great Divide podcast series on the Virginian and Ohio. We've got Brad again, and once again joining us is Chris, here to talk all about the VNO. Take it away, Brad.
Well, hello, Mitchell and Chris. Thanks again. So I believe in our last podcast, we stopped at the 1970s, and I spoke to my father last weekend, and I just asked him a couple questions, and I said, when did you first meet Steve King? He says in 1962. So I thought it was in the 70s, but it was much earlier. So Steve King was a big influence on my dad. Steve worked for the Baltimore and Ohio, I think, as an agent, and he really opened up my dad's on operating things that worked and things that didn't work. So I think Steve deserves a little bit of credit of looking beyond the basement concept. And then when I came along and started taking over with Steve's already in motion, I pretty much reformed it to make it more of a East Coast Chicago St. Louis Gateway Railroad. And of course, Steve and my father, Steve's got the Virginia Midland, which we'll talk about how that bond became more solid here in this podcast. So when we're talking about Steve, what really gave the VNO, the publication, highlighting in publications was I had an opportunity. I talked to Tony Custer about 2 months ago, and we just talked about an hour. And he kind of told me how my dad got associated with Model Railroad Craftsman, Carson's publication. Tony just became, I think he was associate editor or maybe the editor for RMC. He sent some articles in, and Tony was just floored by it. And he went to Hal Carson's and said, look at this work. And what turned out to be one article, I think ended up being about either a 5-part or 6-part article. And then gradually that turned into the book that Carson's came out with, the VNO story. So about that time, it made sense. The three of them got together. They went to West Virginia about, I think, 73 or 74. It was him and Jim Boyd, Steve King, Tony, and my father. And they went to West Virginia and went up all these coal hollers to just check out the railroads. And they came to the conclusion that all three of our railroads would not exist in the 70s. They would have been just closed off everywhere they went. The combination of the chassis system, and then at the time, N&W was cutting off the western end, and this new saying goes with the go on, good girl.
Speaking of Chessie and cats,
yeah, she's always got to see what I'm doing. So that's when they came together and thought that, okay, well, this could work similar to family lines, like what the Clinchfield. You look at the Clinchfield, all three of those railroads are almost a carbon copy of the Clinchfield. Clinchfield terminated Elkhorn City, basically connected with C&O, and then Spartansburg, where they had the connections to the south. And that's where they came up with the Appalachian lines, that, hey, we could survive the three of us merge. And they came across, they said, they didn't want it to be all just one paint scheme, i.e. chassis system. They wanted to still try to keep it to the individual's likings. That's why you see Steve was green, Tony was red, my dad's was blue. So it all kept it, it kept it so it was different. So it was kind of cool seeing like all three together, but the font, the logos were very, very similar. So it kept that. So we could run AM engines, Allegheny Midland, and then also the Virginia Midland locomotives on the trains. So that gave us a broader interchange market, expanded to different routes where the V&O was shut out of. So we were thinking that about the time I started getting into it, is thinking not necessarily more of a model railroad thinking, and my dad and I were thinking the same lines, like, would the V&O exist in the early 70s? And probably they would be, my personal opinion, it'd probably be very hard to run. The only big town they ran into was Dayton, Ohio. And by the 70s, before Conrail, that line there was no direct routes through Dayton, and then ended in Stanton, which was the C&O, and then the Durham, down to Durham, North Carolina. So it really didn't have any major towns. So the bonding of these three railroads actually incorporated that, hey, we could survive. Again, bring up the family lines, because you got the Clinchfield, you had the Western Railway of Alabama, and the Georgia Railroad. They were able to exist because they became part of the family line system. So that's basically how they came across the thinking. Same with the Western Maryland. It ran from Baltimore up to Connersville, Pennsylvania. So again, if it wasn't that merger, it wasn't for the coal traffic, I doubt that they would, I don't see how they would survive. So that's how that came about. With the additional publications, it really launched the V&O and my dad into the spotlight. And again, people started to see some of his ideas, what he was creating, like, hey, wow, look at this guy's really thinking outside the box. So that's what really launched it. The book came out, and then he continued the relationship with Carson's. He also had a pretty good relationship with Kallenbach. He's also very active in the National Model Railroad Association. I think he was the regional president, Midwestern regional president, in early 70s. So at that time, with the involvement of newer locomotives, I mean, the 1970s locomotives were really starting to be improved. We didn't have the Afton wide shell to accommodate the motor. So it was in the 70s and the 80s that really things started to move forward. And as that happened, we were able to update. I think we went from 57, 58, and I think 60. He went a GP30, so I think about 60. I don't remember 60. I know he was dead set getting Penn Central Power, so we went to 68. And then after 68, we had a discussion on what would be the next era to move it up, because at the time the Dash 2s came out, and he wanted to get the Dash 2s, and he said, I'd like to go with 1980. And I said, now granted, my dad, he's like a 10% prototype photographer, 90% model, where I'm kind of the opposite. I said, well, you got to look at the big picture of 1980 versus 1975. I started explaining to him, I said, within those 5 years, your traffic is going to be cut dramatically as the big industry started to decay, close in the late 70s. One example was 1977. It was called Black Monday, when Youngstown Sheet and Tube closed, and pretty soon it was just a domino effect. I said, if you do that, you're going to lose a lot of your business for coking coal, because all those mills, Pittsburgh up to Youngstown, which was on Tony's Railroad, would affect that. Now, granted, at the other hand, but steam plants were starting to get into their unit trains. And I said, also, you have to think about, what Conrail did to the Northeast. So we need to think about that. I said, yeah, the demise of the Rock Island. I said, just let's go with 75. So therefore, you could have a bicentennial locomotive. So we decided that we will go no farther than 1975 for his section, but that doesn't mean I've seen people model in the 2000s where they have the wide cabs. So as the family concept, it will always remain at 1975. We won't go any farther just because of those reasons. It was just deregulation. It would have been too difficult to accommodate just in those 5 years. The rail industry, the auto industry, all that took a big hit in the late 70s on that. So, and in the years we could still get away with 40-foot boxcars. I think in 75 we could still run the hopper cars with Andrew trucks. So there's a lot of pluses I talked them into just to stay at that time period. So one other thing is my dad always says that it's not necessarily model railroading that's interesting. He always says the fellowship. And we may look like we're trying to run this professionally and not have fun, but there were times that we did have fun. He always wanted to run everything perfectly. So late 70s, the company my dad worked for, he was gone often to trade shows, which involved weekends. And the night before he left, we'd be eating dinner, and I'll never forget that. My brother's 5 years younger. So this is about 78, so I was about 18 or 19. And he said, as always, you boys. When he always said that, that means, okay, we need to perk up and listen. He goes, you boys, don't go downstairs. Well, I'm gone. Well, the only thing my brother's heard, one thing the brother and I heard was go downstairs. That's all we heard. So he was gone the next day. That night, we'd go down and we wouldn't necessarily play, but we would take the trucks, those really neat all metal trucks. We'd play that. We'd run trains. We'd have to put everything back. And we got away with that. And I thought, well, you know what? I had a group of friends. There was Aubrey Flock, Greg Borgwald, Jeff McFadden, Doug McClelland, which is actually my father's middle brother. My father's middle brother's oldest son was into model railroading too. He would come over, Norm Miller, another guy, and we'd have our own operating sessions when he was gone. So it'd be like we had certain Fridays. I said, okay, but Dad's gone. We could do it then. So I would dispatch, and my younger brother would run a yard. Greg Borgwald, he was a passenger train guy. After we ran the last passenger train guy, his famous saying was, "Passenger trains are done. Good night." He'd leave, and I still kid him around about that. So we would have fun, and we'd put all the cars back. We put everything back where it belonged. But there was like a sign-in board my dad had, and you would put the name. It'd be like J. Reinhardt on number 61. So about the fourth time we did this, we kind of got bored with our names, so we became creative and started making up all these names. And Aubrey Flock, his name was Willie Make It, and then Greg, my friend Greg, he was a big Mighty Python. One day he put down a Nigel incubator germ on the call-in board, and so when we got done, I would erase it, and then we did something. We were going late, and but Dad was coming back Saturday, and we finished up about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I forgot to erase the board, and we were, I don't know, eating breakfast. He went downstairs, and next thing I know, I heard our names come out. And when he always says Bradley or Patrick, I knew that we got busted. And he was mad at first, and then he joined it, and he goes, "You guys are better operators than my crew." And he still talks about that, is because we would all go out taking pictures. So we were all familiar with the prototype, how they ran, how they operated. So he said, "You can start doing this." So, I spent a year and a half sneaking around behind his back doing this, and finally got caught. The other funny thing was, and this was a big secret, I made this last about 2 years. It was about 74. The town we lived in, there was a paper mill, and the track in 74 was really bad, rotting ties. And just seeing these cars going over this rotten track. And my dad did that in Dawson Springs siding. He carefully measured out 39 feet, took a hacksaw and made a little tiny cut, and just tapped with the straight screwdriver, tap it, and just made a slight impression where the joint was. I said, he could do that, I could do that. So there was a section on the KC&B he couldn't see. So not thinking, I just kind of eyeballed 39 feet and hit it. Well, it was code 70 rail on balsa wood. So if you tap it too hard, you about drove that rail through the balsa wood tie. So ran the first train over it, and everything left the rail. So I put in the Atlas made these re-railers. So I put all these re-railers back there, and that worked. And then one time I was doing something, and again, I heard my name. He would yell up the registers, so everyone in the house could hear it. He called, "Bradley, get down here." Went down there, and he was standing at Elm Grove, and I knew it. I knew exactly what it was. He goes, "Did you do that?" I go, "Yeah, I did it, Dad." He goes, "What'd you do that?" I said, "Well, about 2.5, 3 years ago." So he went in there, and he had to he ended up taking out the track and putting like Atlas snap track, because it was all beat the crap out of it. And I could, yeah, that was fun. So it was, we had a lot of good time, and it was fun. And
did he usually call your name first?
Oh, always. Yeah, I was the oldest son for my brother. My brother got away with a lot for some reason. I don't know why, being the youngest. But yeah, and always called out. Either will say Bradley or Patrick Allen. That's my brother's middle name. And we knew. My brother was smart, man. He hit the door. He was outside. He was gone. And here I was, busted, and had to take the wrath of my father getting mad. And when he got mad, he got over it. And that was about the other thing. The other thing, which I recently told him about 10 years ago, my brother, we, again, being outside, we'd see these 100-car trains. And he said, "Let's do that." So Dad had I think it was made by Hobbytown, and they were lead shells, and they were really heavy. And he weighed it down more and geared it down even more. And this was the most powerful locomotive I've ever seen. So we used that in the head end. And then we used 2 brass SD9s, were pretty heavy. Dad weighted them down again. So each one of us would control, I controlled 2 locomotives. My brother controlled the youngest. We just kind of watched the slack. But we ran from Afton Yard. I think the head end ended up almost to being Dawson Springs. It's unbelievable how long a 100-car freight train is in HO scale. It's pretty amazing. So we got rolling, and we started up. In fact, that photo you're showing right there, just beyond that covered hopper, is a real sharp curve on the 2.2% grade. So we went up there, and cars started rolling on their side. So then we took, okay, that's a light car. So we got smarter. We would stick it like in the middle, and then use some of like the old metal cars that are weighed up front near the locomotives. So we didn't start rolling it. So we tried that, went up, and it rolled again. But this time, when they say Katie couplers don't fail, they do fail. We ended up breaking a knuckle off one car because it twisted, and it was towards the head end and broke off. We did actually pull one knuckle out, and at that point we got too frustrated and just put everything back. So we never did made it all the way across the railroad. That would have been neat, but it was just actually, it's too difficult. I mean, I don't see how real life engineers do it with these long trains now. It amazes me. So I did tell him that, and he didn't get too mad. We just went in and replaced the Katy coupler. But that was some of the fun that my brother and I did, and my dad enjoyed hanging out with the younger guys. Also, he learned a lot in the operations on it. So then the 80s turned in to the late 80s and 90s, and I started rethinking about the V&O more in the future. And one concept, again, I sat down with my dad. I said, okay, the Appalachian lines is great, but we really need to expand and get to a bigger gateway or to the East Coast. And out of Dayton, we used Don Brodowski, had a railroad called the Midwestern Central. So that was our St. Louis connection. And then our Chicago connection was kind of a roundabout way. There was a gentleman, his railroad was Dayton, Duluth, and Western. But the only problem with that, he went around Chicago. And I told my dad, I said, we need to get into Chicago, not go around Chicago. So I saw what Conrail did to the Erie-Lackawanna, especially on the west end. And I think it's the Ohio division. It's a line that ran from Gallipolis up to Mansfield. And I said, there's nothing in Mansfield anymore. So I came up with the idea. I said, the Erie's New York City to Chicago line went through Mansfield. I said, let's build a connection track, run our trains. They had a big classification yard for Chicago and Marion, which is probably about 45 miles west of Mansfield. I said, let's get trackage rights over the Erie, Lackawanna. We deliver our Chicago freight to the Erie. They classify it. They haul it to Chicago. Then in turn, all the V&O freight from all the big railroads at Chicago would come in, assemble a cut of cars to V&O power would couple on in Marion, Ohio, go to Mansfield and down the V&O to the East Coast. And he liked that idea. So that's how we justified Mansfield as still a valuable route. The other thing we did was, I said, we really need to get to a port, mainly Lake Erie, because we're hauling all this coal. We need to, why can't we just haul it to a port? So about this time, there was a B&O branch ran from Mansfield up Sandusky. I believe they had a small coal dock. So I explained to my dad, I said, the B&O abandoned this line, Mansfield, all the way up to Sandusky on Lake Erie. I said, why can't we buy that line? And then now we have a port on Lake Erie, so we can haul a lot more traffic. It could even be export or be anywhere. It could be over in Canada and Ontario. So he did like that idea, and that's how we came up to that. The other thing we need to look at was terminating in Stanton, Virginia. We have all this freight coming from the west, but where's it going to go as part of the bridge route to the east? So then I thought about. So, okay, well, we could use the C&O's, I think it's called the Mountain Subdivision. From there, have trackage rights, and we could get into Richmond. Is it Richmond? Yeah, Richmond or Washington, D.C., where the RF&P used to have their Potomac yard. Again, like the Erie-Lackawanna, we would run over the C&O to there, and then from there, they would classify the freight to either go to the East Coast or like the Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York market, and then south to the Eastern Carolinas. And to continue our expansion, we started looking at the seaboard coastline connection and also the southern connection. So I think this was an excuse to run just a mixture of foreign power. We had seaboard coastline. He had several southern locomotives. He had, I think, 2 rear Lackawanna locomotives. We ran on that. So then the connection to the south, the southern would bring up traffic from Florida, Georgia, Carolina, skip to the V&O. The V&O would take it to Tony Custer's Allegheny Midland. Then that would give us a whole new base of traffic going to the Pittsburgh market, the Buffalo, Canada, all that whole area. And then would give us access through Jim Hedricker's Ohio Southern, which we had a connection for auto parts. So both Tony and Jim basically had auto part trains. And our theory was that we could run it and bypass. At the time, Cincinnati Gateway was just clogged in the 70s. We could go around. We go around Cincinnati. We'd go around St. Louis, and then the Southern would deliver the cars to Atlanta, Mobile, all that. The theory is that we'd get them. It's a longer route, but it's a better freight rate to do that, and that's how we justified that routing. Kind of a big circle on that. And that's how we basically, really, with what I've seen and his Beyond the Basement and my input Beyond the Basement, everything looked logical. That the V&O could exist, as if it were in 1975. Also, I did want to mention that one of the neatest part was I've always been kind of an operation freak, always curious about where a boxcar went. Really enjoyed going up and talking to dispatchers or operators at interlocking towers. And at the time, my father met Dr. Jerry Albers, and he came up with a system that would detect train movement and also would drop the signals. Train approach as a clear signal, it'd go in the next block, the signal would automatically go to a stop. Because before, on the old CTC board panel, once you lined it east or west, or left or right, train would pass it, and that signal would still be indicating a clear signal. So when the train entered, it would drop to a stop. Yeah, they wouldn't go off; they remained lit all the time. So Jerry came up with this microprocessor in the 70s, I think, and it made dispatching just incredibly fun. It was really, really neat. The idea of watching a train go across the board from point A to point B and watching it just by lights. It was just pretty incredible. Kind of like in the movie Matrix. It was just, you knew. I had no problem dealing with it. I understood it totally. So it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed dispatching. In fact, I really enjoyed dispatching and setting up the cars for the layout. I think, what else? So that in the 1980s, late 1980s, it was kind of a my older sister got married first, and then my younger brother got married, and then I moved on about 88, and at the time my parents were having some problems, and my mother called me over and she said, your father and I are getting a divorce, which was a big shock. So my mother left. Luckily, my mother was, it could have been a lot worse than it was, but my mother knew that what my dad had in the basement was important to him. And she basically said when they signed the papers that the layout, it has no value to her at all for the layout, which it could have been a lot worse, but it's unfortunate that they divorced, but it could have been a lot uglier. And luckily my mother did not make it that way. And it ended, and then they didn't speak to each other again until my mother passed about 6 years ago. It was the first time the family got together. And my dad remarried to Sharon in 1991. And at the time, my dad had the new expansion of the Afton Vision, was nearing completion. And that's where he came up with these ideas of having longer passing sidings, because the original VNO, it was a 40-foot boxcar, and a 10, 12-car train was normal. Well, now we're running these 62-foot auto park cars, and we'd run longer and longer trains. So finally, we realized, we need to make some changes. So one of the changes he did was to make really, really long passing sidings on the addition. There's a map. It shows the addition, and all the new addition, you'll notice, has got really long passing sidings. The other thing he did was I touched base with the KCMB is Kelly's Creek and Bradley, and I'll briefly, Kelly, my sister, and you know who I am, and so he made that short line. So the interchange track paralleled the VNO main. So what he did, he eliminated the interchange track and made it the interchange track into the main track. So it was the Fullerton siding. So it was probably about a 20 car. And now we could run these 40 to 50 cars, company hopper cars. And then I think the max on the unit train, I think was around 34 to 40 of the Tubgons. So now we're able to run these longer trains. And the other thing my dad did was there was a small staging yard in the town we grew up in, West Carrollton, and they would often store cars there. There was a cover hopper that came in, it was loaded with roofing granules. And I looked at it, I picked it up, and I turned it down, and I dropped it. I said, there's no coal dust. So I grabbed a handful of it, came back and said, I found the perfect lump coal. So my dad goes, where is it? He goes, did you steal it? I said, no, it's between the tracks. I know exactly where it is. So we grabbed these 5-gallon buckets, similar to what you see at the home improvement stores. So we grabbed 3 of them. So we started going over there. We just started shoveling all the way to the top. We couldn't lift it. So we'd walk like 50, 100 feet. We'd dump some out, and we just couldn't carry it anymore. So we were able to get the 3 buckets end up being 1 bucket. So then what he did was he put a piece of foam, because we put the black granules inside 1 car, but it was just too heavy. I mean, even the most powerful locomotive, it just couldn't pull it. So he put a piece of foam, so the foam was about 70% of the car. And then we had dumped this loose black granules on the car. So actually we had a loose load. Now when it derailed, because they tend to be top heavy, then these granules went all over the place. So that added more weight. And he pointed out, he goes, watch this coal train start out. and you can see the slack on every car going out. And then when that last slack came out, you see the locomotive slowed down a little bit and then slowly got moving. And I said, man, that is pretty sharp. Good thinking, Dad. So that's just some of the things he came up with. The other advantage of it is it wasn't shiny. A lot of times you buy coal out of the bag and it was just too shiny. So these roughing granules are the perfect things. And I think we actually had so much of it. I think we bagged some up and gave this another follow mellow rotor, and he loved it too. But he didn't like it when it derailed because this stuff just spilled everywhere. Let's see. So we're going into the early 90s. Without getting into much details, when my father remarried, he, I don't believe Sharon, my new stepmother, really liked where they lived. That's the impression I got. It was next to a paper mill, which smelled, running train. The railroad was a block away. Everything in the house shook. So she talked my father into moving. And at the time, I moved to Cincinnati, and he called me up. He goes, "Hey, you be able to come up this week? I really need to talk to you. Something important. Something I really need to discuss with you." I immediately thought, like, "Uh-oh, what's wrong? Are you sick? My uncle's sick or something?" He came up and he said, "We're going to move." And I was like in shock. I said, "What about the layout?" He goes, "Well, we're gonna have to tear it down." And it was like losing a family member. I was just in shock. I grew up with it, and it meant something to me. And I don't see how he made that decision, but in the long run, probably was a good decision. And he goes, "Well, I've got some people coming over. I want you to help me tear it down." I said, "I'm not going to do it. I want to remember it as I remembered it growing up for 30 some years. 34 years. I want to remember it how it was. I don't want to see I don't want to see your work of art being torn down, sawed in pieces. I don't want no part of it." And he respected that. And at the time, there was another guy I knew named Dan Hadley. He worked for Pentrex Videos. And I was talking to him one day. I said, "Hey, would you ever done this before?" He goes, "I just do prototype." I explained to him further. And he brought the idea up to whomever at Pentrex, and they liked it. So about a week before they started decommissioning the Afton vision, we came over. We did a lot of videotaping. We had some other people stand in, help run trains, and Dan recorded the last train going over the Afton division for the public eye. So, and at the end, it's got my father, myself, and now my 23-year-old son, who I'm holding in my arms. And that was kind of the ending shot for that. And after that, he said, I didn't go back in the basement again. I just, I don't know. It was like a punch in the gut, losing a loved one. Just couldn't deal with it. Didn't want to see it. Wanted to keep it in my mind. I still see it as it is the last time I left. And like to keep that memory. So I did. He gave me all his archive stuff, and I went through and I saw some slides of the demolition. And still, it almost brought a tear to my eyes to see a section and go, "Oh man, that's a section of Afton or something like that." the luckiest thing was it wasn't just when a crowbar or a hammer. He carefully cut out sections and sold sections to individuals. So there are model railroaders actually have section of the Afton division on their model railroad, and I think Jerry Albert's got some structures. So it's kind of neat. If I see something, I say, "Oh yeah, I remember that building." So, and a few of the cars that still ran, some of the cars are now running on Jerry Albert's, which we'll talk in the future. They're older than me. I mean, they're over 60 years old, and they're still running, like some of the old Varneys and like a good example of that Great Northern. I think that was a Varney, and a lot of the cars, I still see them on Jerry's layout running around, and they're 65 years old, still running. It's amazing. It's like know how many miles it's been. Those wheels have been turning.
Well,
So
just quickly, I saw recently on the Facebook group for the VNO, there was somebody who was listing the passenger cars from the original layout on
yes,
eBay.
yes.
And
I
you
was
got to look at
surprised.
those like, wow, they would be quite old nowadays.
It depends on what they were. I can't think the kit. They were metal, and I think some were actually maybe it wasn't soft as balsa wood, maybe pine. And the older cars are made out of pine, and then he had some made out of metal, and then he converted a lot of the Riverosi coaches, which had the truck built in. The drawbar was built into the truck, so he fixed that, and he really did a nice job. So yeah, all that stuff, the individual who's selling it, I don't know who it is, but all of it's legit, and I was really surprised at the price tag, the bidding wars going on with that. So I told my dad that. I said, should have stored them away, saved them. But he did what it was basically his decision to sell off most of the equipment. And you'll still see people. I know some people. There's a guy named Dave Matheny, and he keeps a spreadsheet of where all the original locomotives went on the Activision. I say, hey, where is 605? Say, hold on. He'll look at me, he'll tell me. So I'm grateful he does that, because it's kind of interesting to see where it is, and I'm sure you guys seen through the Facebook page that people will post their locomotive run on the VNO, or original freight car running on the VNO, and it always puts a smile on my face, knowing that they're not stored as a collection; they're actually turning revenue for somebody. So that's always nice to see. That's one of the things nice about the group is I run it as share, post your thoughts, all that. Everything is welcomed, and we get a lot of people commenting. I have this locomotive. I have this car. It's nice to see it running. Yeah. So about 93, they decided to move. They built a brand new house, and basically my dad's thinking was, we're going to build the house around the layout. So when he just designed the basement to make sure there wasn't anything that's going to be in the way, he told him where the staircase was going to go to the basement, where he wanted it. And we had, I think myself, we had two brothers, Kurt and Chuck Marshall. They've been active with the VNO for many years. They started when they were probably teenagers, and went all the way. And they're still running on the Golly division today. So they've been operating on the VNO for 45, 48 years as operators, dispatchers, and all that. And they're both really good designing. So they come up with different designs. There were like 6 of us came down, and we came up with the most logical plan as for V&O layout number 2. And at the time, what my dad learned, almost 50 years of model railroading, that yes, the Afton division was gone, but it also opened his eyes that when he built it, it was in the late 1950s, and now we're looking at the late 1990s, where that he needs to start thinking that we can't run short trains anymore. We need to run these long trains. And we'd run 50-car trains, and it looked, and the way he designed it, you could look it down, you could just one spot, you could look down, you can see it snaking through this gorge and just see the train creeping along. And it was really good. I think the layout number 2 was what he's learned from the Afton division. He applied that to the second layout, and it really, you could see it. It was just amazing. The second layout was just totally amazing. 1 yard was probably guesstimating 15 feet long, maybe, possibly even 20. And it looked, for that era, it looked neat. And then when he built an industry, I think the one industry we had was close to 7 to 8 feet long. It was a paper mill. And when it stretched out on that, and then when he put the tracks in, it looked really nice. It was against the wall, and it was really neat. And he had tracks for each different commodity coming into it. He has my input. My uncle, my dad's youngest, who's also in the model railroading, his name's David. He worked for the paper mill, which was a block away from my house. And he said, "This is how you got to lay it out. This is where the powerhouse would be. This would be the incoming pulp. The scrap paper would be here. Your different your dry kaolin, your liquid slurry, your chlorine, caustic soda, all that had a track." So he helped design that. And that was Greenbrier paper. And the other thing we did was, I don't know if he did an article about it, but we did a roofing shingle plant. And I took him down to a town, our hometown, just 2 towns south of Franklin, Ohio. And I showed him this. It's fairly old, but it's amazing how compact a roofing shingle plant is. I said, we could do this easily. You just need granules coming in, either like felt, asphalt coming in as material, and then ship the shingles out. And I showed him how compact this plant was and how many cars are able to go in there. And we actually did that. I think it was Virginia Roofing Products. And that was a neat industry. They also received talc for the, they would apply that, I think, the shingles. So when the asphalt is still cooling, it doesn't stick. So they'd use a lot of talc. So we had a spot for talc, the granules, and each, we would make sure that the cars going into it, there was a lot of Sioux Line, Milwaukee Road, Chicago Northwestern. So we came up with an idea, well, a lot of those cars, 3M was the manufacturer. So we would say, okay, like the Sioux Line may be black or green, there'd be gray, white granules coming in. Then they would mix it and apply it to the asphalt shingle. And that was really fun switching that. And at that time, then I think probably early 2000s, my dad realized that he's not getting any younger, so we need to start thinking ahead to the future. And he told me he was going to move into a retirement community, and I supported that. I realized that he was getting getting up there in age, his early 70s, so he was actually thinking ahead. And that was the last, that was the last layout. I'm not sure who did the demolition of that layout, but it was really neat. Just everything just looked more prototypic. It didn't have that feels of 1950s, early 60s model railroading. So he took all that, what he's learned, his weathering, his details, there's one photo of the bridge abutment, and he studied bridge abutments, poured reinforced concrete, what it looked like. You know, the cracks, you put the cracks in it and put where the water would come down the cracks. So all that he learned and applied it to the second layout, and it showed. There are plenty of articles out. I think Kallenbach, I think the Great Model Railroad series, there've been a couple series on that about the second layout. And even today, when the second layout left, at the time, Dr. Jerry Alberts, who lives here in Cincinnati, he built his layout, and he was so inspired by my dad that he wanted to have a section of the V&O, and my dad just jumped on that. He goes, whatever you need, sure. So then the third version is actually in Jerry Alberts' basement. On Jerry models the Virginian Railway Deepwater District. So there's a section of the V&O still operates. I think it's the Alloy subdivision. It's shorter, but it makes my dad happy, and he dispatches. There's a photo of him I took, and he's actually still dispatches the V&O, and he still goes over there. Jerry has operating sessions, and my dad sits there and he runs the V&O. Jerry, we're very thankful that Jerry came out and to offer this, because my dad runs it. He runs it his way, and Jerry runs Virginian his way. And Dad, he created all the trains and all that. He goes, this is what we're going to run for 19. I think Jerry's 58, just before the Norfolk and Western took over the NAW. And yeah, so it's cool. The V&O still exists today, and you can still see original locomotives running on it. A lot of the Pullmans, my sister's Pullman, the Kellyanne, then there's my Pullman and my brother's Pullman, and his private observation car are still running. He did name a wooden Pullman after my mother. Unfortunately, I wanted to get it, but he sold it. I know exactly who has it. It's in good hands. Gentleman near Pittsburgh. So you can still see the V&O today. It may be a little more difficult since it is technically not at my father's house. But the image right there, you see with the RS-11s, that was on layout number 2, and just everything about it. He made improvements, like the embankments running up to the bridge. They wouldn't start the bridge at the tunnel. They would build earthen up to the concrete ends of the bridge. So that was one of his one thing he was really big about on how they would build it. And there's another good example. That's the same bridge, and that's the example we talked about, how the concrete would have weathered in time. He worked for a firm that made concrete accessories, rebar basically. So he was familiar on how concrete aged. The other good example here is how he knew the art of falsifying depth. And you look at that picture, and it looks like it goes way, way back. And by making the creek, you look at the creek, but he also made it go smaller, 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 and it gives a lot of depth. And I think that's probably no more than maybe 18 inches between the locomotives and the wall to the back of the lichen. So he was really a master at that, creating a small space, making it look like it to infinity. Yeah, that's another photo. Yeah, Stephen Priest did incredible job adding the sky. As we mentioned, the Facebook group, I think so actually commented, because is that a real photo? I mean, just everything, this looks really neat on it. He did a really good job. And yeah, I'm glad I was able to share some of his photos onto the Facebook group. And yeah, on one note, my father invited me over to Jerry Alber's operating session. And of course, I said, Jerry's got the Virginia and VNO and also a CNO. I said, sure. So I went over, I saw it. I said, this is really neat. This is really neat. And then I saw Jerry's CTC board. And Jerry has the second CTC board from the Afton division. And what he did was he made it fit for the modeling section he did it. So I found this, I borrowed this plate off of something from the prototype. It said General Railway Signal. I go, Dad, look what I got. So he's based his CTC board off a GSR board. So we mount this little plaque on the side of the board there, and that plaque is still there. And I asked Jerry, I said, hey, can I dispatch? And all of a sudden, Jerry says, you're the new chief dispatcher. So I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. Always, like I said, as I mentioned last time, the operation is what I find lots of fun. This particular photo is a friend of mine. He also lives here in Cincinnati. It's Tom Patterson's layout, and it's Chesapeake, Wheeling, and Eastern. And he's got an incredible railroad. And I actually I went up to his house one day and just snapped all these photos. And he's part of the Jerry's operating crew, and he's in operation like me, so we automatically click. We're both left-handed, so we just had this click that really, this operating was just like, this is so neat. You know, it's like, yeah, running a train's fun, but you know, where's this boxcar going? You know, it doesn't make sense to make this meet here where you're. So we think a lot alike, and yeah, he's an outstanding modeler. This was on layout number 2. This would have been the Eastern Terminus. And then I talked about enlarging industries, that from the AM locomotive all the way to the probably that first Sioux Line boxcar, that was one industry. So it made sense to have 2 tracks going into this industry. And that's one thing he did really well in the second one. The days of the small building that received 40-foot boxcars are gone. You know, all that was gone on this layout. A couple spots, he deliberately made a abandoned siding, didn't lay any rail, and then he had this building where a siding used to be, where it didn't make. This company would not receive a boxcar in the late 1970s. This is the west end of Undercliff Yard. And if you notice, everything is enlarged to like the Indian facility. He got tired of, like the Afton division, the facility was just too cramped. So he enlarged it to make it fit. I think there was supposed to be one more track. A Union Pacific locomotive? Huh. Interesting. To make it fit. And I think, you know, I think that wraps it up on storytelling. Not storytelling, but just basically what it was like.
Well, we haven't had to jump in much at all. It's fantastic storyteller.
I've been gabbing that much. Did I miss anything that you could think of that?
I wouldn't say so. Like, I mean, the second layout, from what I was able to follow through Model Railroad, or at least, was mostly the second layout. So obviously missed the first one. And yeah, it didn't really seem like it was around as long, I guess you'd say. I guess it really wasn't. But just for me, it looked like a lot of what you guys learned on the first one was put into the second layout as like a more sort of a polished sort of version of the VNO.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, he learned from his mistakes, and just said, "Well, I'm going to do this different. This has got to be different." And he was able to compact a lot of track. And yeah, it was a smaller basement, but he was able to compact the track just by looping, out of sight looping. So I think it only one time where the tracks went over itself, but he would use the barriers where you wouldn't see the person over on the next peninsula working. So he was really good about creating and hiding stuff. Again, it gives it that depth, your running length, and yeah, it was pretty incredible. I really enjoyed doing that. I just thought of something else. During the open houses, he'd always put me underneath the layout as staging, because what he did was, and this was really, really smart, he kept the staging area all in one location, which is just brilliant, because all the trains going to staging just went to one spot. So I'd go back in there, and one day during open house, I saw a train getting ready to leave, and he'd say, "Go line up track 4." So I said, this train looks too short. So I started adding cars and cars and cars and cars and cars, and he didn't like to run long trains at open houses, because longer the train, the more problems you had. Well, I just ran. One train left there with 60 cars coming out of the staging, and he goes, "Why did you add cars?" After everybody left, "Why'd you do that?" I said, "Yeah, but this is just, shows how well you model. You notice the train didn't derail. You notice how nice it looked. People commented, going around a curve, nothing derailed. Track work good shape. Locomotives pulled the train up the hill." And he didn't believe that, but it was still neat. And he said, "Well, don't run them over 60 cars." Still, it looked neat, especially when you go to a train show and you see these modular layouts and they're running these long trains, and it just, to me, it looks more real than, back when I remember where you said before, it was like a 10 to 15 car train was normal, these old 40-foot cars, and that was a hot train going someplace. So
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Listening to you talk about why you chose 1975 and the thought that you put into that, and then I look around and I see all the current interest people have in the VNO. With earlier, you made the comment about the wide cab locomotives that Intermountain has made, or Fox Valley has made. What are your thoughts and Alan's thoughts, or how do y'all feel about people moving forward with the VNO concept and maybe changing the direction, but it's out there? Because one of the things I think that really impresses me about the VNO versus other railroads is it really does encompass, just like how a real railroad is not a party of one. A real railroad has all kinds of people who touch it and make it what it is. What are your thoughts about somebody who wants to model a modern day VNO with their theme, or their interpretation or their twist on the story?
I have discussed this with my dad, and there was a point where he just pretty much handed everything over to me, and like with different things down the road, which we'll mention. But like with the more modern locomotives, they would send him the artwork and they would prove it. There's been, I think somebody came out with one with the American flag, and I don't think that was approved by my dad. I don't know that for sure, but one of them came out. He wasn't mad about it. I think he felt honored. But to me, I mean, I think it's really flattering to see somebody wanting to run a modern V&O locomotive on their layout, or incorporating a section of the V&O on their layout. And I get correspondence weekly from people saying, what if, can I do this? And I said, well, we really didn't go in this town. I said, but you could do this. And most of the time, people are just grateful to run it. But that's not saying it's really nothing. V&O is not. We're not going. Lawyers not going after. I mean, one thing nice about the model railroad, you could do whatever you want to do, freelance. So, if someone wants to build something in a certain town in Ohio, West Virginia, then that's by all means they should do it. If they want to incorporate the V&O, then I think that's great. I mean, it shows that there's an interest out there, that people want to incorporate a short section, whether it's an interchange or a run-through train, with the V&O, and it's flattering. I tell them, I talk to my dad weekly, and I said, this guy is doing this, or this guy, Gary Turner says hi, and so it's really neat. As moving forward with the locomotives, I don't know what it's going to be. I'm hoping my oldest son, who's also enjoys model railroading, and he takes pictures too. I'm hoping that he's going to, at the time, maybe just to keep the legacy going. I think it's important. Just the ideas will come across. Who knows? Battery powered locomotives. What's the paint scheme going to be on that? I mean, just future's uncertain, but it's always exciting. And I encourage anybody, if they get a V&O engine, then by all means, it's flattering for my dad to see that this particular gentleman is running a V&O. I don't know. I have no idea.
That's really good to hear. I think that your ease of access to the V&O Facebook group and that attitude is the V&O is going to be around for a very, very long time in perhaps some exciting forms. So it's going to be exciting to watch where this goes.
Yep, I'm excited about it. With the Facebook group, it's under V&O Historical Facebook page group. You just have to answer one question. If you don't know the question, I do moderate of the moderator. So I screen see who you are, and unfortunately, some people were just
sure
not doing it. I mean, 95% of the time they get the question correct, and with this, I think it opened up life again. It made people post pictures. When it first started out, first I want to give credit to actually the guy who started. I don't even know how we connected, but there's actually a friend of mine. His name is Donald Dunn, and he works the railroad out of Hazard, Kentucky. And he said, I want to start this Facebook group on the V&O. I said, okay, sure. And he goes, have your permission to do it? I said, sure. So I didn't think anything of it. And then it was just amazing how much it's grown. And at times with my work schedule, it's almost difficult to moderate it and look at it. And it was actually Don's idea about the Facebook group. and he deserves the credit. He pretty much got started, and he kind of handed it over to me. So he deserves all the credit. And with that, it's just the one thing I did notice, it brought back people who I knew from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s who I met. And now we have a almost like an invisible bond of friendship. And that's what's really neat. As I mentioned, Gary Turner, I haven't seen him in years. I'm trying to think who else. There's just a lot of people. And I established a lot of friendship that went beyond trains, just to say, hey, next time you're a gentleman, Ted, who lives in Baltimore, he's always invited me to say, hey, next time you're on the East Coast, stop by, I'll buy you lunch. And just things like that. And meeting some people for the first time is always exciting. There's just so many people, really grateful people who reached out to me with different ideas. There are people who send me gifts. There's a guy in Michigan named Harold Fox, and he made these beautiful O-scale cars by HTM models, and they're fantastic looking cars. And he made one for myself and my dad, and I was like, these things must have cost him a fortune. And just things like that, just a lot of people been generous over the years on that. And with that, there's the future is a lot of really neat things are going to happen in 2022. So if you're watching, hearing the podcast, if you want to join the group, please join. You can hear this podcast. There's a link to it. Will be a link. And like I said, to answer one question. I think I've kicked off one person, and 6 years we're already over 1,500 members, which.
Well, I will say this, there's, if you're on Facebook and you go from group to group, there's a whole different type of interactions from group to group. And the VNO group that you moderate, everybody's very respectful. Everybody seems to have a very genuine interest in the VNO. It's just a fun group to be part of. So I appreciate your work setting that tone with that group. It's a fantastic job.
That's the way I always feel. When Facebook first came out, I used to have tons of them. I started dwindling down because it was almost like the moderator almost had an attitude that, oh, your pictures aren't good enough, or your model's not good enough. And I don't want it to be that way, because it's there for everyone to enjoy. Model railroading, it's fun. And that's why I said anything's open. I mean, you decal a freight car, please show it. My dad and I went to a train show a couple weekends back, and again, I don't know how I met him. He sent me a Facebook message, or I sent him something, but I met a man named Peter Hayes, and he's actually 22, and he models the VNO and N-scale, an incredible model. And it's the first time I met him, and it was just things like that. You finally meet the person, the name behind that person. And it was nice meeting him. And at the train show, it was nice seeing the people for the first time. And it's just example. It's just always that, comment your thoughts, anything. It could be something silly. I'm trying to think of how my dad would run it, which it's funny. I said, I'll come over to your house, talk about my father, and I'll come over to your house and I'll set you up in anonymous Facebook. So you can at least see these people, hey, say hi to your dad, say hi to your dad. And he goes, well, they'll know it's me. I said, they won't know it's you. Believe me, they will not know it's you. And now I understand. like my sons, I get stuck on something and they kind of roll their eyes and they grab my laptop, and 2 seconds later they're done where I've been fighting over an hour. So, I get it. I get it. If he doesn't want to be part of the Facebook group, that's fine. I wasn't upset about it. I was kind of saddened because I wanted him to see the reaction he's still getting, and the people asking, wishing him well, and things like that. I want him to view, and I always talk to him once away. I said, well, this guy said hi. This guy said hi. This guy said hi. This guy, all that, and then it didn't change his mind. I said, well, Tony Cusser is on Facebook, and he joined the Vieto Historical Society. I said, when you feel a little bit left out, of the two of you left out, or you're left out, and Steve, Tony is part of the Facebook group. No, that anchor is solid, man. He's not, no interest. So that's fine. That's his choice.
So your job is to get Tony to start a AM Facebook group.
Working on that. Yeah, we'll see what I can do about it. He has the following. It's probably maybe even greater than my dad's. So, and he's outstanding modeler. I think him and my father have the same philosophy on a lot of stuff, operation and making things look logical. And they're still good friends.
I do want to throw in a comment just so that people watching know that all of the pictures rolling in the background are pictures that were pulled from the Facebook group, just to give credit to where they came from.
Right. And at appreciation, I don't have a mind. I really don't mind if someone downloads my father's picture, but that's why I have the watermark stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a lot of thieves out there who will take a picture then claim it's theirs. So the only thing I ask is, do have respect for others. If you're going to post something, give credit.
Sure.
I mean, that's like the Stephen Priest. I mean, I would never claim that's my photo. That's why it's in big and bold.
Right.
It's photo. And so that's the only thing. And a lot of people have been really generous in saying, hey, can I post this photo to my group or whomever? And they've been really courteous. And in a way, I don't mind to a certain group of people doing it, because in case something happens, I got all my dad's slides, and I've got 3 external hard drives. The house burns down, my idea is I've been starting to figure out, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with that? So several people reached out, people I trust. I said, my dad shot, when he shot on slide film, he's got like 6 photos of one shot. Like some of those fog photos, that'd be 1 roll of film. Mm-hmm. And that's something. So a lot of people say, how did you get the fog? So we took a humidifier, and since it's cool, we kind of had it up higher, and it just slowly drifted down, and it just filled in. So what we did was, we aimed it, and luckily it was a long exposure, so anything was moving was a blur, which would appear as a fog. And then one of the shots, we actually took a flashlight that was a really warm tone, flashlight, a lower Kelvin temperature, like maybe 2000. So it gave it look like a real warm spotlight, gave some warmth to it. And that's all we did for the lighting. I just held it there above the inch facility. And this humidifier, we're able to aim it, because it's a time exposure. It doesn't matter where we aim it, it's not going to show up any detail. So in that fog, just laid that mist just laid in perfectly. And we did a lot of that shot. They were really, really difficult. That one shot probably took one evening, And I helped him on that. He needed 2 people to do that. You know, our first photos, we tried to create exhaust coming out, and that was the most difficult thing. I went over and shows the time. I went over and bought a pack of cigarettes and bought a cigar, and this, I don't know, I was in my early teens, and walked over to the drugstore. I said, you know, give me this and give me one of those, and went over there and we tried that, but it didn't look right. So my dad came up with taking twine and then putting just a little bit of oil on it and then lighting it. And for some reason that gave a more effect. I guess tobacco smoke is gives off a different color than what exhaust should be. But this, by the combination of burning that, it gave it that darker look. And I think the first time we did that, there was a vertical shot. I think I made it the cover, or coming out of the depot, or coming out of the tunnel in Clintwood. And I'd be on one end of the tunnel blowing the smoke, and he would say, "You're not." First time we did it, I was like like that, and the smoke was like blasting out of the tunnel. And he goes, a little slower, then wasn't slow enough. And so finally it took several times, because each time we'd light it, let it burn, blow it out, and then try it, and then blow it through the tunnel. And then finally he said, okay, just do that. And then we created that shot and made the cover on one of the magazines. But yeah, whoever made the humidifier, that is just the best thing for fog. It just worked perfect. And plus, I always been a photo bug. I started taking pictures around 76, and I always enjoyed it. So my dad and I, we had that bonding where we could take pictures of the layout. And he'd say, how's this look? This look. The one thing he always stressed was, like an example on this shot, this is one thing that he changed was, it would work in 2021 if you got a drone, but you got to think, where's the photographer standing? And a lot of other people came up with the same idea. You need to think that when you're taking this picture, you want it to look real. You got to put your camera on the end, on the layout itself. I see a lot of that in shots that people finally came up with that. But this photo was taken, geez, probably mid 80s. You could tell it was taken with the harshest of a flash. So that was some of the creations, and just using different gels in front of the lighting. The other thing he did was the concept of shadows. When you took a picture, and example, if it was a sunny day, then you're not going to have 3 shadows cast from the locomotive. So he was really, really particular on where is this shadow going to fall. So he would have like a real dominant light on side, and then photographers often call it a headlight or a hair light, where you see any kind of portrait, you'll see there's a flash, just given separation between the background and this is a little bit of flash on top of the person's head. And his thinking on that was just to give it so the shadow detail is really not, it's really not black, you're not seeing anything. It's just enough to put in just a little bit of detail that you can see that, I don't want to say softens up the shadow as a term for it. Just adds a little bit more light to the shadow detail. I mean, in this photo, you notice that the shadow is all coming from one direction from the trees. And that's one thing he really, really looked out for. So it's the main lighting is to the right, and he probably had a reflectant light to the left, just to help, just to lighten it up, but not enough to cast a shadow. And then let's see, we tried. He didn't like photo umbrellas too much, and we ended up using reflectors on some, just to help, just to reflect that light. On this particular photo, he did all the painting, the background. That's all done with oil paints. Again, and you're actually looking into a corner there. And yeah, so, but some people have come towards me about different projects. I'm grateful for those individuals that they want to continue the legacy. As I said, 2022 is going to be a good year for a lot of things. There's a lot of things that will be happening next year. I don't want to mention anything at the moment, but it's the VNO will continue on. And for those people involved, I can't thank you enough. Hopefully you're listening, and I can't thank you enough for coming to this idea and doing things, and it's really nice. It's been a real pleasure getting to know a lot of people just through the Facebook group with different things. And other than that, I was always hesitant about bringing girlfriends and wives to the basement. And then Karen, still currently married to her, and I took her and I showed her to the basement, and she goes, "Wow, this is really neat." I said, "You think so?" She goes, "You're not going to have one. You can come over here." And that's fine. I mean, at this point, I knew that, because people say, "Why don't you create the VNO?" And I said, "It's not going to happen. I just don't have the talent or the patience, or setting me down for like 4 or 5 hours to do something. I couldn't do it." So, I mean, that's nothing against me. It's that my dad was a talented man, and when my sons were younger, I did get a sheet of 4x8, and we ran a circle, and I still got some of the original VNO equipment is still running down there, but they're all off to other things and kind of lost track or lost interest. My youngest one has no desire to. He's 19, and in his opinion, I'm still the stupidest person he ever met. My 23-year-old, he's really into trains, and I think anything he'll continue on the legacy in what I would consider like chapter 3 on the VNO story. And other than that, I'm sure I'll think of something else, but it's been fun. Like I said, it didn't really dawn on me until at a National Mall Railroad Association meeting, convention, that they had my name tag, and I said Bradley McClelland. And he goes, "Are you Alan's son?" And then like whole convention, and people were doing that, and that then finally dawned on me. It's like, oh, this is interesting. And I don't like gloating on it. I'm an introvert, so my dad is kind of an extrovert. He likes it. I don't like. That's why I like Facebook, because I could be unseen. When I told Chris, I said, "I'll do this, but I guess I don't want my face on it." Well, he changed my mind quickly on that. So look at this. So it's just pretty neat. But I try to emphasize that it's my dad's creation, my dad's thinking, my dad, all that. It's my dad. It's not mine. I just happened to grow up in the house and be part of it, and enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun. Met a lot of nice people. I can find my water. Not getting choked up. Oh, there it is. Okay, that's better.
Well, if we're talking about 2022, Chris, you've got something that's coming along with a bit of VNO colors applied to it.
Yeah. Do we want to do an ending for this episode kind of officially? I want to change the background and stuff for that one if we can.
I
Yep.
can't think of anything else.
Well, I've thought of a good final line. As
Okay.
Brad said earlier, passenger trains are done. Good night.
All right. So my notes, everything I wanted to say, I said.
Okay.
I can't think of anything else that would. Yeah, I would just. I'm good unless you guys have any other further questions I want to dive into.
No, I think this has been very insightful and revealing, and it's been a pleasure to listen to. The
Definitely.
pictures, just for those those who make it this far in the podcast, all these images were pulled from the VNO Historical Society Facebook page, just as a idea of the kind of content that's on there. So that's where they came from. And this has been an honor to sit here and hear your perspective of the VNO. I appreciate you coming on board and sharing that.
Thank you both. You always hear podcasts, these famous people, and I forget. I think Chris, you mentioned it, and you introduced me to Mitchell, and thank you both. Thank you, Mitchell, for staying up late, early morning down there. So, it's been an absolutely honor to do this. Thank you both for helping me tell the story, some of the stuff that people didn't know about. Hopefully they know, and a little bit more about the family and the legacy. And hopefully when I get there, you'll see my oldest son where I'm at now, but be teleported or something at that time.
Very
Well,
cool. Thank you
just
very
for me
much.
personally, it's like I've read about this in magazines, and being in a whole another country on the other side of the world, it's just kind of blown my mind a little bit that I actually get to talk to people that have been involved with these things, which is just, yeah, I find it amazing. And it's pretty much part of the whole social media thing that we were talking about with the Facebook group, that it's sort of given the ability of people to sort of come together no matter where you are, really.
That's
And,
exactly
yeah.
right. I mean, I got to know Christopher for somebody from the Facebook group, and he just contacted me out of the blue, and we'd actually established a pretty good relationship. And then he introduced me to Chris, and then it's just amazing. I mean, we've never seen each other face to face, but here we are, and it's pretty remarkable if you think about it. Small world.
Very small world.
Yeah.
I think.
But thank you both again. It's an honor for me to even be asked to do this. So I thought it would never happen, and I can go to my grave happy now.
Wow, that's an honor.
It doesn't take much to make me happy.
Well, don't plan on that anytime soon there,
I don't
Brad.
plan on it.
All right.
My wife's got to get to me first. So. Good thing she's not listening.
Very good. Well, Mitchell, the passenger trains have left. Is that right?
Yeah, passenger trains are done. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.